My name is Emma Parker, and I've spent the last 5 years watching my family celebrate everyone else's milestones while treating mine like consolation prizes. I'm the daughter who chose purpose over prestige, the sister who didn't follow the golden path, the woman who smiled through 1,000 passive-aggressive questions about my future. But nothing prepared me for the moment my mother stood in front of 200 wedding guests, champagne glass raised, and said the words that would change everything. Your brother's wedding was perfect. When will it be your turn? I smiled, because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the man I'd been quietly dating for 3 years, the one they dismissed as just a coffee shop worker, had more success, more influence, and more integrity than anyone in that room could imagine. And in exactly 48 hours, at a gathering none of them saw coming, the truth would spill out in the most spectacular way possible. Let them wonder, let them judge. The real story was just beginning, and it would rewrite everything they thought they knew about success, about love, and about me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It started on a Saturday afternoon in September, when the maple trees around Lake Oswego were just beginning to turn amber and rust. I was sitting in my modest loft in the Alberta Arts District, grading papers from my 10th grade English class, when my phone buzzed with the family group chat notification I'd been dreading for weeks. Mom had sent a photo of Tyler and Jessica standing on the steps of the Sentinel Hotel downtown, both of them glowing in that perfect newly engaged way that makes everyone else feel like they're running behind in life. The caption read, "They've set the date, October 14th at the Sentinel, black tie, save the date cards going out next week, so proud of my son." 3 heart emojis, 1 crying happy face, 0 acknowledgement of the daughter who'd been teaching underprivileged kids for the past 4 years. I set my phone face down and returned to the essay about To Kill a Mockingbird that my student Marcus had written. His handwriting was messy, his grammar needed work, but his understanding of injustice and moral courage made my chest ache in the best way. This was why I taught, not for the salary that made my mother wince when she mentioned it to her book club friends, not for the studio apartment with the temperamental heating, but for moments like this, when a 15-year-old kid from a rough neighborhood saw himself in Atticus Finch's quiet bravery. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Aunt Patricia in the group chat. Finally, someone in this family is doing things right. Traditional wedding, proper timeline, this is how it's supposed to be done. I could practically hear her pointed tone through the screen. Aunt Patricia had made it her personal mission to remind me at every family gathering that I was approaching 29 without a ring, a mortgage, or any visible sign of settling down into the life she deemed appropriate. The messages kept coming. Cousin Melissa chimed in with, "Jessica's dress is going to be Vera Wang. I helped her pick it out. You're going to die when you see it." Grandmother Dorothy added, "A fall wedding, how lovely, and at the Sentinel no less. Your grandfather proposed to me in that very hotel lobby 60 years ago." Even Dad joined in with a simple "proud of you, son," followed by a thumbs-up emoji that somehow felt like it carried more weight than all of Mom's hearts combined. I waited for someone to acknowledge me, to ask how my week had been, to mention the grant proposal I'd submitted to bring a new literacy program to my school. Nothing. Radio silence unless the topic was Tyler's ascending star. I closed the group chat and opened my text thread with Liam instead. His last message from that morning was a photo of a latte he'd made, the foam art shaped like a fern leaf, with the caption, "Nailed it, thinking of you." I smiled despite the tightness in my chest. Liam Bennett had walked into my life 3 years ago on a rainy Tuesday when I ducked into a small coffee roastery in the Pearl District to escape a downpour. He'd been behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, hands moving with practiced ease as he pulled espresso shots and steamed milk. We'd talked about books. He'd recommended Circe by Madeline Miller. I'd suggested The Overstory. By the time the rain stopped, I had his number and a feeling in my stomach like I'd just found something I didn't know I'd been searching for. My family met him exactly twice before they formed their complete and unchangeable opinion. The first time was at a summer barbecue at my parents' house. Liam showed up in jeans and a Henley, bearing a bag of freshly roasted coffee beans from the shop. Mom had smiled tightly and said, "How thoughtful," before setting them on the counter and never mentioning them again. Tyler had asked what Liam did for a living. "I work at a coffee roastery," Liam said simply. "I manage the shop and do some roasting." Tyler had nodded with that particular expression people get when they're trying to be polite about something they consider beneath them. "That's cool, man. Everyone's gotta start somewhere." Liam had just smiled, unbothered, and changed the subject to ask Tyler about his work in corporate finance. The second meeting was even worse. It was Thanksgiving, and Aunt Patricia had too much wine. She'd cornered me in the kitchen while I was refilling the water pitcher and said in a voice loud enough for the dining room to hear, "Emma honey, he seems nice, but don't you want someone with ambition, someone who's going somewhere? You have a master's degree." My mother hadn't defended me. She'd simply looked down at her plate and cut her turkey into smaller and smaller pieces. What none of them knew, what Liam and I had agreed to keep private, was that the coffee roastery wasn't just where he worked, it was his, all of it. Not just the one location in the Pearl District, but 7 others scattered across the Pacific Northwest, each one built on the principles of direct trade, living wages, and environmental sustainability. Ember and Oak Coffee had become one of the fastest-growing specialty coffee companies on the West Coast, featured in Portland Monthly, praised by environmental groups, and quietly valued at just over $12 million. But Liam still worked the counter 3 days a week, still roasted beans at 4 in the morning, still learned every employee's name and asked about their families. He'd started the company when he was 23 with money he'd saved working construction and a loan from a community bank that believed in his vision. Now at 31, he could have hired someone else to manage operations, could have moved into a corner office, could have stopped wearing the apron with the coffee stain on the pocket. But he didn't, because as he told me once while we were walking through Forest Park, "The moment I stop understanding what it feels like to be on the floor, is the moment I lose the right to lead anyone." I'd fallen in love with him for that, not for the business or the money, which he lived so far below that most people would never guess he had it, but for the principle underneath. He wanted to build something that mattered more than his own comfort, and he wanted to do it quietly, without fanfare, without using wealth as a shield against criticism or doubt. So we'd made a choice together. We wouldn't announce what he'd built. We'd let people think what they wanted, and we'd see who judged us by appearances versus who took the time to actually know us. My family had failed that test spectacularly. Over the next 6 weeks, as Tyler and Jessica's wedding preparations consumed every family conversation, the comments about my life got sharper and more frequent. At a weekend brunch, Mom sighed dramatically and said, "I just worry about you, Emma. You're so focused on work and this relationship that isn't going anywhere. When are you going to think about your future?"
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I'd smiled and said, "I think about it every day," and left it at that. At a dress fitting for the bridesmaids, Jessica's mother had pulled me aside and said with saccharine sweetness, "You know, dear, there's no shame in being single at your age. Lots of women are focusing on careers now." I wasn't even single, but correcting her felt pointless. During a family dinner, Grandmother Dorothy had looked at me over her glasses and said, "In my day, a woman your age would have been married with children already. Times have certainly changed." Dad had cleared his throat uncomfortably, but said nothing. Tyler had scrolled through his phone, and Mom had just nodded along like Dorothy was sharing wisdom instead of judgment wrapped in nostalgia. The only person who pushed back was my younger cousin Amy, who was 22 and still in college. She'd rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might stick and muttered, "Maybe Emma actually likes her life. Ever think of that?" Grandmother Dorothy had frowned. Amy had been uninvited from the next family dinner. I'd sent her a gift card and a thank you text. Through it all, Liam remained steady. He never asked me to defend him, never suggested we should just tell everyone the truth to make it easier. He simply showed up when I needed him, listened when I vented, and reminded me that other people's opinions didn't define our worth. We spent our evenings cooking dinner in my tiny kitchen, reading on the couch with our feet tangled together, taking long drives out to the coast, where we could breathe without the weight of expectation pressing down on us. He treated my work with respect, asking about my students, celebrating when one of them had a breakthrough, helping me prep supplies for classroom projects. And slowly, I realized that this quiet life we'd built together meant more to me than any grand gesture or public validation ever could. But my family couldn't see that. They saw a woman approaching 30 without a ring. They saw a teacher making $42,000 a year. They saw a boyfriend who worked at a coffee shop, and they measured all of it against Tyler's six-figure salary, his downtown condo, his picture-perfect fiancée, with her marketing degree and her Peloton and her color-coordinated Instagram feed. The wedding arrived like a storm I'd been watching gather on the horizon. The Sentinel Hotel was transformed into something out of a magazine spread, all cream-colored roses and Edison bulb chandeliers, and gold-rimmed everything. Jessica wore Vera Wang as promised. Tyler wore a custom suit. The ceremony was flawless, the kind of flawless that only happens when you have a wedding planner and an unlimited budget and a family that believes appearances are everything. I sat in the third row, wearing a navy dress I'd borrowed from a friend, because buying something new felt wasteful when I was saving for classroom supplies. Liam sat beside me in a simple but well-tailored suit, his hand warm and steady on my knee whenever the whispers got too loud. And there were whispers. I heard them during the cocktail hour when Aunt Patricia told her friend, "That's Emma's boyfriend, he works at a coffee shop, such a sweet girl, but she really doesn't aim very high, does she?" I heard them during dinner when one of Jessica's aunts asked Mom, within my earshot, "Is your daughter seeing anyone serious?" And Mom had hesitated just long enough before saying, "She's dating someone," in a tone that suggested I was dating a park bench. I heard them during the speeches when Tyler thanked everyone who'd supported him and Jessica on their journey, everyone who believed in them, everyone who showed them what success looks like, and his eyes skipped right over me like I was part of the wallpaper. But the worst moment, the one that made my smile freeze and my hands clench under the table, came during the reception when the dancing had started and the champagne was flowing freely. Mom stood up, slightly tipsy, microphone in hand, because she'd insisted on giving a second speech after her official mother of the groom toast. She looked radiant in her emerald cocktail dress, her hair professionally styled, her makeup perfect. She looked like a woman who'd gotten everything she wanted in a son, and she was about to make sure everyone knew it. She tapped the microphone twice, and the room quieted. "I want to say something else," she began, her voice warm and wavering with emotion. "Tonight has been perfect, absolutely perfect, and I couldn't be more proud of Tyler and Jessica. This is what I dreamed of for my children, this kind of success, this kind of partnership, this kind of future." She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a cocktail napkin. "Jessica is everything I could have hoped for in a daughter-in-law, accomplished, graceful, the perfect match for my son, and as I look at them starting this beautiful life together, I can't help but think." She turned, and her eyes landed directly on me. "When will it be your turn, Emma?" The room went silent. 200 people turned to look at me. I felt Liam's hand tighten on mine under the table. Mom was still talking, still smiling like she'd just paid me a compliment instead of humiliating me in front of everyone I knew. "I know you're focused on your teaching, and that's wonderful, honey, but don't you want this too? Don't you want what your brother has? A real future, a real partnership, someone who can provide stability?" She glanced at Liam, and though she didn't say his name, the implication hung in the air like smoke. I smiled. It wasn't a fake smile or a forced smile. It was the smile of someone who knows a secret so big that it turns pity into power. I smiled because in exactly 48 hours, my family was about to learn who Liam really was, and that smile would be the thing they remembered when they replayed this moment in their heads with horror and regret. I stood from my seat with as much grace as I could gather, Liam rising beside me like a shadow that refused to leave even when the light turned harsh. "Thank you, Mom," I said, my voice steady and clear enough to carry across the reception hall. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm exactly where I need to be." The words landed soft but firm, and I watched confusion flicker across her face before she recovered with another champagne-aided smile and handed the microphone back to the DJ. The music resumed, conversations picked back up, and the moment dissolved into the general buzz of the reception, but I felt it lingering on my skin like humidity, that particular shame that comes from being pitied in public by someone who's supposed to protect you. Liam guided me toward the edge of the dance floor, his hand on the small of my back, and we slipped out onto the hotel's balcony where the September night air was crisp and clean. The city lights of downtown Portland spread out below us, the Willamette River catching reflections like scattered diamonds. I leaned against the railing and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 6 weeks. "You okay?" he asked quietly, and I nodded because I was, surprisingly. "I'm fine," I said. "Better than fine actually." He raised an eyebrow, waiting, because in 2 days, at your company's sustainability gala, every single person in that room is going to realize exactly how wrong they've been, and I'm going to enjoy every second of it. The sustainability gala had been planned for months, long before Tyler's wedding date was even set. It was Ember and Oak Coffee's annual event, a black tie fundraiser that brought together environmental organizations, business leaders, journalists, and community activists to celebrate and fund sustainable practices in the Pacific Northwest. This year it was being held at a private estate in the Columbia River Gorge, a sprawling property with vineyard views and a reputation for hosting only the most exclusive events. Liam had invited my entire family weeks ago, framing it as a nice event that might interest them, something to do the weekend after Tyler's wedding. They'd all RSVP'd, yes, mostly I suspected because the venue was impressive and it gave Mom another chance to wear one of her gowns. None of them had asked who was hosting it, none of them had looked closely at the invitation with its elegant logo, a simple ember and oak leaf intertwined. They just assumed Liam had gotten tickets through work, maybe as some kind of staff perk. The irony was almost too perfect. We stayed at the wedding another hour, long enough to be polite, long enough for me to hug Tyler and wish him well with genuine warmth, because despite everything he was still my brother. Jessica air-kissed both my cheeks and told me my dress was cute in a tone that made cute sound like a synonym for trying. Aunt Patricia cornered us near the coat check to tell Liam he seemed like a hard worker and that manual labor built character, which was rich coming from a woman who'd never worked a day in her life after marrying into money at 23. Grandmother Dorothy patted my hand and said perhaps I'd meet someone at the gala. "You never know, dear, these events are wonderful for networking." Dad gave me a hug that lasted a beat too long, and I wondered if some part of him sensed that he should apologize, but couldn't quite figure out what for. Mom was holding court near the dessert table, laughing with Jessica's parents, and when she saw us leaving she waved with her fingers, the kind of wave you give to acquaintances, not your daughter. "Drive safe," she called out, "and I'll see you Monday for brunch before the gala." I nodded, already mentally preparing for what that brunch would be like, knowing it would be one last round of commentary before everything shifted. Liam and I drove home in comfortable silence, his hand resting on my thigh as the city lights blurred past. When we got back to my loft, I kicked off the borrowed heels that had been pinching my feet for 6 hours and collapsed onto the couch. He brought me tea without asking, chamomile with honey, and sat beside me with my feet in his lap. "Want to talk about it?" he asked, and I shook my head. "I just want to be here with you, and not think about any of them until I have to." He nodded, and turned on a documentary about ocean conservation that we'd been watching in pieces all week. We sat there until I fell asleep against his shoulder, and when I woke up at 2 in the morning, he'd covered me with a blanket and was dozing beside me, his arms still around my shoulders like even in sleep, he was making sure I knew I wasn't alone. The next morning was Sunday, which meant farmer's market and lazy breakfast, and the kind of quiet routine that had become my favorite part of weekends. We walked through the stalls at the Portland farmer's market, buying fresh bread and local honey and vegetables we'd turn into soup later. Liam knew half the vendors by name, asked about their families, their harvests, their plans for winter. He bought flowers from an elderly woman who grew dahlias in her backyard, the blooms so deep red they looked almost black. "These are for you," he said, handing them to me with a grin that made my chest feel full. For surviving yesterday, I buried my face in the petals and smiled. You know what the best part of yesterday was? What? Knowing that in less than 48 hours, my mother is going to realize she spent an entire wedding reception pitying me in front of 200 people, and then she's going to walk into that gala and see your face on every program, every banner, every piece of literature about Ember and Oak. He laughed, the kind of genuine surprised laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes. You're kind of ruthless when you want to be. Only when people earn it, I said, and trust me, they've earned it. We spent the rest of Sunday preparing, not for the gala itself, because Liam's team had that handled down to the last detail, but for the emotional aftermath. We talked through how we'd handle the questions, the shock, the inevitable attempts at backpedaling. We agreed we wouldn't be cruel, wouldn't rub it in, but we also wouldn't pretend the last 3 years of judgment hadn't happened. I'm not going to let them rewrite history, I said firmly. I'm not going to smile and act like all those comments about your ambition and my choices didn't hurt. Liam squeezed my hand. You shouldn't have to. They made assumptions, they can live with being wrong. Monday arrived with steel gray skies and the threat of rain that never quite materialized. I met Mom for brunch at a cafe in Lake Oswego, one of those places with white tablecloths and mimosas that cost $16. She was already seated when I arrived, scrolling through photos from the wedding on her phone, her face glowing with satisfaction. "Emma," she said, looking up, as I slid into the booth across from her. "Wasn't it just perfect?" Everything was absolutely perfect. It was beautiful, I agreed, because it had been, objectively. Tyler and Jessica looked happy. I'm glad for them. Mom nodded enthusiastically and launched into a recap of every detail I'd already witnessed: the flowers, the cake, the way Jessica's veil caught the light during the ceremony. Then she paused, setting down her phone with a careful casualness that immediately put me on guard. "I wanted to talk to you about what I said during the reception," she began, and for a moment I thought she might actually apologize. "I hope you didn't take it the wrong way. I wasn't trying to embarrass you." I blinked, waiting for the but I knew was coming. "I just worry, Emma. You're 28, you're with someone who," and she hesitated delicately, "who doesn't seem to have much drive or ambition. I want more for you than struggling to make ends meet with a man who's content making lattes." There it was, the concern wrapped in condescension, the love language of a woman who measured worth in salary and status. "Mom," I said slowly, "you don't know anything about Liam. You've spoken to him maybe 3 times, and each time you've already decided who he is based on where he works." She frowned. "I know he's a nice man, Emma, but nice doesn't pay bills. You have a master's degree, you could be doing so much more with your life, dating someone who matches your potential." I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the frustration of being misunderstood by someone who should know me better than anyone. "What if I told you I'm happy?" I said. "What if my potential isn't measured by my partner's income or job title? What if I've built exactly the life I want?" She reached across the table and patted my hand like I was a child who didn't understand how the world worked. "Sweetheart, happiness is important, but so is security, so is planning for the future. I'm just trying to help you see that before it's too late." I pulled my hand back gently. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm fine, better than fine. You'll see." She looked puzzled, but didn't push further, and we spent the rest of brunch discussing safer topics: the gala that evening, what she was planning to wear, whether Aunt Patricia would behave herself in a setting that fancy. Mom had chosen a floor-length silver gown that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "I'm so excited," she said as we paid the check. "I've heard the Columbia Gorge estate is absolutely stunning." Liam must have worked really hard to get tickets to something this exclusive. I smiled into my coffee. He did work hard, harder than you know. That evening I stood in front of my closet trying to decide what to wear to watch my family's entire perception of my life implode. I'd bought a dress specifically for this event months ago, back when Liam first told me the gala date, and I realized it would be the perfect opportunity for the truth to come out. It was a deep forest green, elegant, without being flashy, the kind of dress that said I belong here without shouting it. Liam picked me up at 6, and when I opened the door, he stopped mid-step and just stared. "You look incredible," he said finally, and I saw something in his eyes that wasn't just attraction but pride, like he was honored to stand beside me. "You clean up pretty well yourself," I said, adjusting his bow tie even though it was already perfect. He was wearing a tuxedo I'd never seen before, tailored so precisely it looked like it had been painted on, and I realized with a start that this was probably how he dressed for business events I never attended, the version of himself he kept separate from our quiet life. We drove out toward the gorge. As the sun began to set, the September sky turning shades of peach and lavender. The estate appeared around a curve in the road, like something from a different era, all stone, and glass, and manicured gardens that rolled down toward the river. Valets in crisp uniforms took our car, string lights glittered in the trees, a jazz quartet played softly near the entrance. "This is beautiful," I breathed, even though I'd seen photos during the planning stages, seeing it in person felt different, felt real. Liam took my hand. "Ready?" I squeezed back. "Absolutely." We walked up the stone steps together, and I saw the moment the door attendant recognized him. "Good evening, Mr. Bennett," the young man said with genuine warmth. "Everything is prepared exactly as you requested." "Thank you, Marcus," Liam replied, and I remembered that Marcus was one of his employees, a college student who worked at the Pearl District location and was studying environmental science. Liam had helped him apply for scholarships. Inside, the estate's grand hall had been transformed into an elegant celebration of sustainability and community. Banners hung from the vaulted ceiling displaying the Ember and Oak logo, alongside the logos of partner organizations. Tables were set with linens made from recycled materials, centerpieces of local flowers and herbs. A large screen at the front of the room cycled through images of coffee farmers, reforestation projects, and community programs funded by the company's foundation. And there, on every program, every napkin, every piece of signage, was Liam's name. Ember and Oak Coffee, founded and led by Liam Bennett. I watched guests arriving, some I recognized from news articles as local business leaders, environmental activists, journalists. They greeted Liam with respect and familiarity, shaking his hand, thanking him for the invitation, discussing projects and partnerships. He moved through the room with quiet confidence, introducing me to everyone as Emma, the woman who keeps me grounded, the teacher who reminds me why this work matters, and then I saw them arrive. My family, stepping through the entrance in a cluster of expensive fabric and expectation. Mom in her silver gown, Dad in his tuxedo, looking slightly uncomfortable, Tyler and Jessica fresh off their wedding high, Aunt Patricia dripping in pearls, Grandmother Dorothy, leaning on her cane with regal posture, even Cousin Melissa, who'd probably come hoping to Instagram the whole thing. They stood in the entrance taking it all in, clearly impressed by the venue, the elegant crowd, the obvious exclusivity of it all. Mom was already scanning the room, probably looking for us, ready to comment on how nice it was that Liam had gotten them tickets. I felt Liam's hand on my lower back. "Here we go," he murmured. I spotted Mom seeing us across the room. She waved, that same finger wave from the wedding, and started walking toward us, with the rest of the family trailing behind. But as she got closer, I saw her step slow, saw her eyes catch on a banner overhead, saw her gaze drop to the program in her hand that someone had given her at the door. Saw the exact moment she read Liam's name, and her face went blank with confusion. She stopped about 10 feet away, the rest of the family clustering around her, all of them now staring at the programs, at the banners, at the staff members who kept stopping to greet Liam with deference and respect. "Emma," Mom said slowly, her voice uncertain in a way I'd never heard before. "What is this?" "This is the Ember and Oak Coffee Sustainability Gala," I said calmly, "annual fundraiser for environmental and community programs. You RSVP'd weeks ago," but she looked at Liam, then back at me, then at the program in her trembling hand. "This says," Liam stepped forward with that same gentle smile he'd worn when Aunt Patricia told him manual labor built character. "It says, I'm the founder and owner," he finished for her, "because I am. I started Ember and Oak 8 years ago. We now have 7 locations, a roasting facility, and a foundation that's funded over 40 environmental and social programs across the Pacific Northwest." The silence that fell over my family was so complete I could hear the jazz quartet playing from the other room. Tyler's mouth had fallen open. Jessica looked like she was trying to recalculate equations in her head that no longer made sense. Aunt Patricia had gone pale, her pearls suddenly looking like they were choking her. Grandmother Dorothy gripped her cane.
Tighter, her sharp eyes moving between Liam and me like she was seeing us both for the first time. But it was Mom's face that held my attention. The shock, the confusion, and underneath it all, the dawning realization of every comment she'd made, every pitying look, every subtle insult delivered over 3 years to a man who'd been successful beyond anything she'd imagined, who'd simply chosen humility over performance. Mom's champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor, the sound sharp and final in the stunned silence. A staff member appeared immediately with a cloth, but she didn't even notice, her eyes fixed on Liam like he was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "But you work at a coffee shop," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You make drinks. You wear an apron." "I do," Liam said easily. No defensiveness in his tone. "I work the counter at our Pearl District location 3 days a week. I roast beans most mornings at 4. I believe if you're going to run a company, you need to understand every job in it. You can't lead people through work you're not willing to do yourself." Tyler found his voice first, though it came out strangled. 7 locations? How is that even possible? You never mentioned. He trailed off, probably remembering every conversation where he dominated the discussion with talk of his corporate position, while dismissing Liam with barely concealed pity. "I don't tend to lead with my resume," Liam said with a slight shrug. "I prefer people get to know me first, see how I treat others, what I value. The business is just what I do. It's not who I am." Aunt Patricia made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a choke. She'd gone from pale to flushed, her hand clutching her pearls like they might anchor her to reality. "But all this time," she stammered, "we thought, I mean, you seemed so—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't quite articulate that she'd thought he was beneath us, that we'd all thought he was someone to pity rather than respect. Jessica recovered her composure enough to glance around the room, and I watched recognition dawn as she spotted faces she clearly knew from Portland's business scene. She worked in marketing, ran in those circles, and suddenly she was surrounded by people she'd probably tried to network with at other events, all of them here because Liam had invited them. Her face went through several shades of red before settling on a mortified pink. "Emma," Dad said, and his voice was so quiet, so defeated, that I almost felt sorry for him. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because you never asked," I said simply. "You met Liam twice and decided you knew everything about him. You heard he worked at a coffee shop, and that was enough for you to judge his entire worth, his future, his value as a partner. And honestly, I wanted to see if any of you would look past the surface, if any of you would bother to actually get to know him before deciding he wasn't good enough." The words hung in the air between us. Truth without venom, observation without cruelty. Mom's eyes were filling with tears now, mascara beginning to smudge at the corners, and I could see her replaying every conversation, every dismissive comment, every pitying look she'd given me over the past 3 years. The wedding toast especially, that public moment of concern about my future with a man who couldn't provide stability, all of it now revealed as spectacular misjudgment delivered in front of 200 witnesses. Grandmother Dorothy was the first to move. She stepped forward with her cane, her posture still regal despite the shock written across her face, and she looked at Liam with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Young man," she said, her voice steady despite everything, "I have spent 3 years believing you were taking advantage of my granddaughter's kind nature. I see now that I was remarkably foolish. It wasn't quite an apology, but coming from Dorothy, it was close. Liam's expression softened. Mrs. Harrison, with respect, I was never taking advantage. I was just living my life quietly, the way I prefer. Your granddaughter saw that and loved me anyway. That's not something I take lightly. Dorothy nodded slowly, and I saw something shift in her eyes, a recalibration happening in real time. She turned to me. You chose well, she said, and there was an edge of regret in her voice. I'm sorry I couldn't see it. A well-dressed couple approached us then, and I recognized the woman as the director of a major environmental nonprofit. Liam, she said warmly, completely oblivious to the family drama unfolding. We need to steal you for photos before dinner. The governor just arrived and she's asking for you. Liam glanced at me and I nodded. Go, I said. I'll be fine. He squeezed my hand once before walking away with the couple, falling into easy conversation about watershed restoration projects. I watched him go. This man who'd built something extraordinary and wore it so lightly that my entire family had missed it. I turned back to find them all staring at me with varying expressions of shock, shame, and confusion. The governor, Melissa said, her voice faint. He's meeting with the governor? Mom lowered herself into a nearby chair like her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. I don't understand, she said, and she sounded so lost that part of me wanted to comfort her, but a larger part knew she needed to sit with this. If he's this successful, why does he still work behind a counter? Why live so modestly? Why not tell us? Because that's who he is. He doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. He built this company on principles, not ego. He pays every employee a living wage plus benefits. He sources every bean through direct trade relationships with farmers.
He visits personally. He's funded environmental restoration projects, scholarship programs, community initiatives. And he does it quietly because he believes the work matters more than the recognition. Tyler ran a hand through his hair, his perfect wedding weekend completely overshadowed now by this revelation. I told him everyone has to start somewhere, he said, sounding sick. At your barbecue. I told him that. Jessica put a hand on his arm but said nothing, probably remembering her own comments about aiming higher. Aunt Patricia had recovered enough to look indignant. Well, you could have corrected us, she said, her voice shrill. You could have simply told us the truth instead of letting us make fools of ourselves. I could have, I agreed. But then I wouldn't have learned who was willing to judge someone based on their job title versus their character. I wouldn't have seen who in my own family valued appearances over authenticity. And honestly, after 3 years of comments about my choices, my future, my relationship, I think I earned the right to let you all discover you were wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Dad flinched. The wedding toast, he said. Oh God, Emma, your mother's toast. Mom made a sound like a wounded animal. 200 people, she whispered. I stood in front of 200 people and asked when you'd find someone who could provide stability. I pitied you in front of everyone we know. And he was... She gestured helplessly toward where Liam stood across the room, shaking hands with the governor. He was this the entire time. I didn't respond because there was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like triumph. And despite everything, I didn't want to grind their noses in it. I just wanted them to understand, to finally see what they'd been too blind to recognize before. A staff member approached with a gentle smile. Excuse me, the program is about to begin. Mr. Bennett asked if the family would like to be seated at the table near the front. There are place cards with your names. My family exchanged glances, clearly unsure whether they even deserved to sit at the front after everything. But they followed the staff member, moving through the crowd like people walking through a dream where all the rules had changed. I trailed behind, watching them take in the room with new eyes, seeing not just the elegance but the purpose behind every detail, the mission statements printed on recycled paper, the local artist whose work hung on the walls, all of it reflecting the values of a man they'd dismissed as lacking ambition. We reached a round table near the small stage where Liam would presumably speak. The place cards were handwritten in elegant script. Linda and Robert Parker, Tyler and Jessica Parker, Patricia Morrison, Dorothy Harrison, Melissa Chen, and at the seat next to the one marked Liam Bennett was my name, Emma Parker, with a small note beneath it that only I could see. The woman who believed in me before anyone else did. I sat down and felt the weight of the evening settle around me, knowing this was just the beginning of a much longer conversation. Dinner was served, each course prepared by chefs from Liam's restaurants, each dish highlighting local ingredients and sustainable practices.
The food was exceptional, but I barely tasted it. Too aware of my family's silence, the way they picked at their plates and avoided eye contact with each other. Conversations bloomed around us, other tables filled with laughter and animated discussion, but our table sat in a bubble of awkward quiet. Finally, Tyler leaned toward me. Emma, I need to say something. He paused, searching for words. I've been a terrible brother. Not just about this, about Liam, but in general. I got so caught up in my own success that I stopped seeing you as someone with your own path. I just saw you as someone who wasn't following mine. It wasn't an eloquent apology, but it was genuine, and I could see the regret in his eyes. I appreciate that, I said carefully, but you need to understand it wasn't just you. It was all of you. For years, making me feel like my choices were wrong because they didn't look like what you expected. Jessica spoke up then, her voice small. I'm sorry too. I judged you without knowing you, both of you. I thought, she hesitated, I thought I knew what success looked like, and I was wrong. Mom was crying openly now. Not the delicate tears she'd shed at Tyler's wedding, but real, messy crying that made her makeup run. Baby, I'm so sorry, she managed. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I knew what you needed to be happy. But you never asked what actually made me happy, I said gently. You never asked about my students, or the literacy program I'm trying to start, or why I chose teaching in the first place. You just decided it wasn't enough because the salary wasn't impressive. You did the same thing with Liam. You saw the apron and decided you knew everything. Dad reached across the table and took my hand. We failed you, he said simply. We measured everything by the wrong standards, and we made you feel small for living according to your own values. I don't know how to make that right. The lights dimmed then, saving us from the conversation that was too big for a dinner table. A woman took the stage, someone I recognized from Liam's team, and began speaking about the evening's purpose, the celebration of sustainable practices and community partnership. She introduced various speakers, each one talking about programs they'd worked on with Ember and Oak. Projects that had transformed communities, protected ecosystems, created opportunities. And then she said the words that made my family sit up straighter. And now, please welcome the founder and heart of Ember and Oak Coffee, a man whose vision has changed not just how we think about coffee, but how we think about business itself. Liam Bennett. The room erupted in applause as Liam took the stage. He looked completely at ease up there, comfortable in a spotlight I'd never seen him seek. He waited for the applause to die down, then smiled that warm smile I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago in a coffee shop during a rainstorm. Thank you all for being here, he began. 8 years ago, I had an idea that probably seemed crazy to most people. I wanted to build a coffee company that put people and planet before profit, that proved you could be successful while being ethical, that showed business could be a force for good. He talked about the early days, working alone in a tiny roasting facility, building relationships with farmers in Colombia and Ethiopia, learning that direct trade meant more than just better coffee, it meant dignity and partnership. He talked about opening the first location and his decision to work every position, to understand the business from the ground up. He talked about the moment he realized he could do more, that success meant responsibility, that wealth was only meaningful if it lifted others. Said something that made my chest tighten. But none of this would mean anything without the people who believed in it when it was just an idea. My employees, who took a chance on a company that cared more about values than rapid expansion. The farmers who trusted me when I was nobody. The community members who supported us. And especially, he paused, his eyes finding mine across the room, the woman who saw who I was when I had flour on my jeans and coffee stains on my shirt, who loved me not for what I built, but for why I built it. The room turned to look at me, hundreds of eyes finding our table, and I felt my face flush. Liam continued, Emma teaches high school English to kids who don't always believe in themselves. She makes less in a year than some people spend on a car, and she's never once asked me to be anything other than who I am. She's never needed me to prove my worth with a title or a salary. She just needed me to be kind, to be present, to share her values. That's the kind of success that matters,
the kind my company could never measure. The applause that followed was thunderous, but I barely heard it over the pounding of my heart. Mom was crying again, but differently now. Her hand over her mouth, her eyes on me was something that looked like understanding finally breaking through. Dad's jaw was tight, like he was fighting his own tears. Tyler stared at his plate. Jessica wiped at her eyes carefully, trying not to smudge what was left of her makeup. Liam finished his speech talking about the evening's fundraising goals, the projects they hoped to launch, the partnerships being formed. Then he invited people to enjoy the rest of the evening, to connect with the organizations present, to be part of the change they all believed in. As he left the stage, people swarmed him, wanting to shake his hand, share ideas, express gratitude. I watched him navigate it all with the same grace he showed when someone ordered a complicated drink at the shop, present and genuine with each person. I stood, needing air, needing a moment away from my family's apologetic eyes. I slipped out through a side door and found myself on a terrace overlooking the gardens, the river visible in the distance under a sky full of stars. The September night had turned cold, but I didn't care, just breathed in the clean air and let the weight of the evening settle on my shoulders. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to find grandmother Dorothy making her way carefully across the terrace, her cane tapping against stone. She came to stand beside me at the railing, both of us looking out at the view in silence for a long moment. "I was married to your grandfather for 43 years, she finally said. "He was a good man, a provider, respectable, but I'm not sure he ever once asked me what I wanted, what made me happy beyond the life he'd planned for us." She turned to look at me, and in the dim light I could see tears on her weathered cheeks. I've spent my whole life believing that security and status were the same as happiness. Watching you tonight, hearing that young man speak about you, I realize I was wrong. You found something I never had. Someone who sees you. I felt my own eyes sting. "Grandma," I started, but she held up a hand. "Let me finish. I'm 84 years old, and I've been a fool, especially about you. I pushed my values onto you because I thought I was protecting you from struggle, but you were never struggling. You were building a life of meaning while I was too blind to see it. I'm sorry, Emma. Truly sorry." I hugged her then, this formidable woman who'd terrified me as a child, and felt her thin arms come around me tightly. We stood there for a moment, 3 generations of misunderstanding starting to untangle in the cold night air. When we pulled apart, she patted my cheek. "That man in there loves you remarkably well. Don't let our foolishness cast any shadow on that." "I won't," I promised. She nodded and made her way back inside, leaving me alone with the stars again. But not for long. Liam appeared in the doorway, his bow tie loosened, looking tired but content. "There you are," he said, crossing to wrap his arms around me from behind. "Quite an evening." "Quite an evening," I agreed, leaning back against his chest. "How are you feeling?" "Relieved," I said honestly. Vindicated, maybe, but mostly just relieved that it's done, that they finally know. He pressed a kiss to my temple. "And how do you feel about them knowing?" I turned in his arms to face him. "I feel like maybe now we can actually be a family, a real one, based on truth instead of assumptions." He smiled. "Think they learned their lesson?" I laughed. "I think they're learning it. Dorothy apologized. Tyler apologized. Mom's devastated, but I think she understands now. It's a start." We stood there, swaying slightly to music drifting from inside, and I realized this moment right here was what I wanted all along. Not the dramatic reveal or the shocked faces, but the possibility of being seen for who I actually was, of having my choices respected, of building bridges from a foundation of honesty instead of pretense. The weeks following the gala unfolded like watching ice melt in spring. slow and irreversible. My family didn't transform overnight, didn't suddenly become different people who valued substance over surface, but something fundamental had shifted in how they saw the world and how they saw me. The first real test came 3 days after the event, when Mom called and asked if she could take me to lunch. Just the two of us. We met at a quiet bistro in the Pearl District, ironically, just 2 blocks from the Ember and Oak location where Liam was working that afternoon. She arrived early. I could see her through the window, already seated, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup like she was trying to draw warmth from it, even though the day was mild. When I slid into the booth across from her, I noticed she looked different somehow. Smaller, maybe, or just less certain. She'd always carried herself with this unshakable confidence that came from believing she understood how the world worked. But now there was hesitation in her eyes, a carefulness in how she held herself. Emma, she stopped, then stopped again, her fingers tightening around the cup. I've been trying to figure out what to say to you for 3 days. I've written speeches in my head, practice apologies in the car, but nothing feels adequate for what I need to say. You could just speak from the heart, I suggested gently. She nodded, took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep. I've failed you as a mother. Not just about Liam, though that was spectacularly terrible, but in so many ways over so many years. I measured your life against some imaginary standard that had nothing to do with who you actually are or what you actually need to be happy. The waitress came by and we ordered, though I doubted either of us would eat much. When she left, Mom continued, her voice quieter now. When you chose teaching over a corporate career, I was disappointed. I didn't understand why you'd pick a job that paid so little when you had so much potential. But I never asked you why it mattered to you. I never tried to understand what you saw in it. She paused, her eyes meeting mine with something that looked like pain. And when you brought Liam to meet us, all I saw was his apron and his job title. I didn't see his kindness or his integrity or the way he looked at you like you hung the moon. I saw what I thought was a limitation on your future, and I judged him for it without knowing anything about who he actually was. I reached across the table and took her hand, not because I was ready to say everything was fine, but because I could see she was genuinely trying. Mom, the hurt wasn't just about you getting it wrong. It was about you never asking. In 3 years, you met Liam twice. You never invited him to family dinners, never tried to get to know him, never once asked me what I loved about him. You decided he wasn't good enough, and that was that. She nodded, tears spilling over now. I know. And the worst part is I thought I was being protective. I thought I was trying to save you from a mistake. But all I was doing was showing you that I valued appearances more than I valued your judgment, your happiness, your actual life. The wedding toast. She pressed her hand to her mouth like she could push the words back in. Emma, I humiliated you in front of everyone. I stood up there and pitied you for having exactly what I should have celebrated. I don't know how you can forgive that. I don't know if I'm ready to forgive it yet, I said honestly. But I'm willing to try if you're willing to actually change, to actually see me as someone capable of making good choices, even when they don't look like yours. She squeezed my hand. I want to change. I want to understand. Tell me about your students, about why teaching matters to you. Tell me about Liam, about how you fell in love. Tell me all the things I should have asked about years ago. So I did. I told her about Marcus, the kid who wrote about Atticus Finch and saw himself in that quiet courage. I told her about the literacy program I was developing, how it could change the trajectory of kids' lives if we could just get the funding. I told her about meeting Liam in the rain, about conversations that stretched for hours, about the way he treated servers and strangers with the same respect he showed to everyone.
I told her about his philosophy of leadership, about watching him mentor young employees, about the morning I saw him mopping the floor at 5 a.m. because the night crew had been short-staffed and he wouldn't ask anyone to do work he wasn't willing to do himself. Mom listened without interrupting, really listened in a way she maybe never had before. And I watched her face transform as she began to understand not just the facts, but the meaning underneath them. "That's why he still works the counter," she said slowly. "It's not about the money or proving anything. It's about staying connected to the purpose." "Exactly," I said. "He could sit in an office and manage from a distance, but then he'd lose touch with what makes the business matter. He'd become the kind of leader he never wanted to be." She was quiet for a long moment, processing. "Your father and I built our life around traditional markers of success. Good schools, good jobs, good addresses. It never occurred to me that those might not be the right markers for everyone, that there could be other equally valid ways to measure a life well lived. I'm 56 years old, and I'm just now learning that lesson from my daughter." Our food arrived, and we picked at it while talking about everything we'd never discussed before. The assumptions she'd made about my life, the judgments I'd swallowed instead of confronting, the ways we'd both contributed to the distance between us. It wasn't a complete healing. Wounds that deep don't close in one conversation, but it was a genuine start, and that mattered more than I'd expected it to. Before we left, Mom hesitated with her hand on her purse. "There's something else I need to say. Your father and I would like to contribute to your literacy program. Not as an apology, though God knows we owe you more than we can express, but because it matters. Because you've dedicated yourself to something that changes lives, and we should have supported that from the beginning." I felt my throat tighten. "Mom, you don't have to do that." "I know we don't have to. We want to." She pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. "This is a check for $25,000. It's a start for your program, and if you need more, you tell us. This is important work, Emma. Your work. And we should have recognized that years ago." I opened the envelope with shaking hands and stared at the check, at the amount that could fund materials and training and everything I'd been trying to piece together on my teacher salary. "Thank you," I whispered. "This will change everything for my students." She smiled, tentative but real. "Good. That's what matters." When I left the restaurant, I walked the 2 blocks to Liam's shop and found him behind the counter helping the afternoon rush. He spotted me through the window, and his whole face lit up in a way that still made my heart skip. I waited until there was a lull, then told him about lunch, about Mom's apology, about the check. He pulled me into his arms right there behind the counter, not caring that customers were watching. "I'm proud of you," he murmured into my hair, "for giving her a chance even when it
Would have been easier not to. That's grace, Emma. Real grace. The following Sunday, my entire family gathered at my parents' house for dinner, something that hadn't happened with everyone present in over a year. But this time felt different from the moment I walked in. Mom hugged me tightly at the door. Dad shook Liam's hand with actual warmth. And even Aunt Patricia managed a stiff but genuine apology for her years of dismissive comments. Tyler pulled Liam aside before dinner, and I watched them talk on the back patio, my brother's posture humble in a way I'd rarely seen. Later, Tyler told me he'd asked Liam for advice about his career, admitted he was burning out in corporate finance and wanted to find work that felt meaningful. Liam had listened and offered to introduce him to people in the nonprofit sector. No judgment, just genuine support. Dinner itself was remarkable for its ordinariness. We ate pot roast and mashed potatoes, passed dishes around the table, talked about normal things without the undercurrent of judgment that had poisoned so many previous gatherings. Grandmother Dorothy asked Liam about the farms he worked with, genuinely interested in the relationships he'd built. Jessica asked me about my students and listened to the answers with real attention. Melissa wanted to know if Ember and Oak was hiring because she was tired of her marketing job and wanted to work somewhere with actual values. But the moment that stuck with me came near the end of the meal when Dad stood up and tapped his glass for attention. The table fell quiet, everyone turning to look at him with curiosity. "I want to say something," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been thinking a lot these past weeks about what it means to be a father, about the ways I've succeeded and the ways I've failed." He looked at Tyler first. "Son, I'm proud of you. Your career, your marriage, the life you're building, all of it. But," and his gaze shifted to me, "I realized I've only known how to show pride for accomplishments that look like mine. I valued your corporate success, Tyler, because I understood it. It was familiar." He turned fully to face me now. "Emma, I didn't know how to value what you were doing because it was different. Teaching doesn't come with the same markers I was trained to recognize. There's no corner office, no big salary, no obvious status. So I dismissed it as less than, as something you were doing until you figured out your real path. But watching you these past weeks, hearing you talk about your students, seeing the program you're building, I finally understand. You found your real path years ago. I was just too blind to see it." His voice cracked, and he paused to steady himself. "And Liam," he continued, "I owe you an apology I'm not sure I have the words for. You've shown nothing but respect and kindness to this family, even when we gave you every reason to walk away. You've been patient with our daughter, supportive of her work, and you built something extraordinary while staying humble enough to keep doing the smallest jobs in your own company. That's character I should have recognized immediately. Instead, I judged you for working behind a counter and missed everything that actually mattered." Liam stood and crossed to shake Dad's hand. "Mr. Parker, I appreciate that, truly. But I didn't do any of it for recognition. I did it because it's who I want to be. Your daughter saw that when no one else did. That's all that mattered to me." Dad pulled him into a hug instead of just shaking hands, and I saw Mom crying quietly into her napkin. Tyler was staring at his plate with red eyes. Even Aunt Patricia looked moved, her usual sharp edges softened by the raw honesty in the room. The rest of the evening flowed with a lightness that had been missing from family gatherings for as long as I could remember. We played cards, laughed at old stories, made plans for Thanksgiving that actually included asking Liam and me what we wanted instead of just announcing arrangements. When we finally left around 10, Mom walked us to the door and hugged us both. "This is how it should have always been," she said. "Thank you for not giving up on us, even when we didn't deserve your patience." 3 months passed, and autumn gave way to the hard cold of a Portland winter. My literacy program launched with the funding from my parents and an additional grant Liam helped me apply for through the Ember and Oak Foundation.
Served 30 students in the first session, kids who'd been falling through the cracks, who needed someone to believe they could love reading, could see themselves in stories, could find their voices through words. Watching them discover that was worth every difficult conversation, every moment of being underestimated, every judgment I'd endured. Tyler did end up leaving corporate finance. He took a position with an environmental nonprofit doing financial management, a massive pay cut that terrified him at first, but ultimately brought him more satisfaction than his old six-figure salary ever had. He and Liam became genuine friends, meeting for coffee to talk about purpose-driven work and sustainable business practices. Jessica started volunteering at one of the community programs Ember and Oak supported, working with refugees to help them build small businesses. She was good at it, brought real skills and genuine care, and I watched her transform from someone concerned primarily with appearances to someone engaged with actual impact. Even Aunt Patricia surprised everyone by using her social connections to organize a fundraiser for my literacy program, channeling her need for status into something productive. She raised $40,000 and actually cried when she saw the kids reading at our showcase event. Grandmother Dorothy became one of my program's biggest advocates, attending every event, donating generously, and telling anyone who would listen about her granddaughter, the teacher who was changing lives. Mom and Dad became regular fixtures at Ember and Oak, not just as customers but as genuine supporters of what Liam had built. Dad joined the foundation board and brought his business experience to help scale their impact. Mom started volunteering at the coffee education workshops Liam ran, teaching people about sustainable sourcing. They were finding their own ways to align their lives with values they'd overlooked for decades. But the moment that felt like the truest full circle came on a cold January evening when Liam and I were having dinner at my parents' house. It was just the four of us, a quiet Wednesday meal without the extended family. We were talking about the upcoming year, plans and hopes and dreams, when Liam set down his fork and reached for my hand. His fingers were trembling slightly, and I looked at him with sudden attention, recognizing nervousness I rarely saw from him. "Emma," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I've spent 3 years watching you choose principle over convenience, meaning over comfort, truth over approval. You've taught me what courage looks like, not the loud dramatic kind but the quiet everyday kind that builds a life worth living." I squeezed his hand, my heart starting to race, because I could feel where this was going. He pulled a small box from his pocket and my mother gasped. "I don't have a speech prepared because anything I planned feels inadequate for what you mean to me. You saw me when everyone else was looking past me. You valued what I was building not because it was profitable, but because it was purposeful. You never needed me to be anything other than exactly who I am." He opened the box and inside was a ring, simple and beautiful, a single stone set in recycled gold. "Will you marry me? Will you build the rest of this quiet, meaningful life with me?" "Yes," I said, the word coming out choked with tears and joy, and 3 years of loving this man who'd taught me that being underestimated was sometimes the greatest gift, because it showed you who really saw you. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slid the ring onto my finger and pulled me into his arms, while my parents cried and laughed and hugged us both. Mom was apologizing through her tears, saying she was so happy, so grateful she hadn't ruined this with her foolishness, so blessed that I'd found someone who loved me this well. Dad shook Liam's hand with genuine warmth and said, "Welcome to the family, son, officially this time." We spent the rest of the evening making champagne toasts and calling family members to share the news. Tyler and Jessica screamed with excitement over the phone. Grandmother Dorothy declared she'd already started planning what she'd wear. Even Aunt Patricia managed to be gracious, saying she couldn't wait to see me as a bride and that Liam had her complete approval, which coming from her felt like a hard-won victory. Later that night, back at my loft with the ring catching light every time I moved my hand, Liam and I sat on the couch wrapped in blankets and comfortable silence. "Do you think they've really changed?" I asked, "or are they just on their best behavior because they feel guilty?" He considered the question carefully. "I think guilt was the catalyst, but I've watched them putting in real work. Your mom volunteers every week. Your dad takes the foundation work seriously. Tyler completely changed careers. That's not just guilt. That's people actually examining their values and making hard choices to align with what they've learned." I nodded, wanting to believe it. "I guess time will tell." "It always does," he agreed. "But Emma, even if they slip back into old patterns, even if this transformation isn't permanent, you've already won. How do you figure? You built a life based on what matters to you. You found work that gives you purpose. You created relationships based on authenticity. You didn't compromise who you are to fit their expectations. That's success in the truest sense, regardless of whether they ever fully understand it." He was right. Somewhere along the way, probably in those early days when I chose teaching over a corporate path, when I fell in love with a man in an apron who made me laugh and challenged me to think deeper, when I committed to students everyone else had written off, I'd stopped measuring my life by other people's standards. The gala hadn't been about proving anything to my family. It had been about revealing a truth they'd been too blind to see, that success comes in forms they'd never learned to recognize, that worth isn't measured in salary or status, that love isn't about finding someone impressive but finding someone real. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Just wanted to say again how happy I am for you both. Liam is exactly who you deserve, someone who sees your light and helps it shine brighter. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that. Love you so much, I showed Liam the message, and he smiled. See? Real change. Maybe, I said, or maybe just the beginning of it. Either way, I'm glad they're trying. We sat there in the quiet of my loft, the city lights of Portland spreading out beyond the windows, and I thought about the journey that had brought us here. The rain-soaked coffee shop meeting, the family barbecue where they'd first dismissed him. The years of patient endurance while judgment piled up like snow. The wedding toast that could have broken something fragile, but instead revealed something strong, the gala that shifted everything. And now this, a ring on my finger, and a future stretching out full of possibility. You know what the best part is, I said to Liam. What's that? They spent 3 years pitying me for choosing you, for choosing teaching, for choosing a life they couldn't understand. And I spent those same 3 years being happier than they could imagine. Their pity was based on their limitations, not my reality. He kissed my temple, and now they get to see what I've known all along, that a life built on purpose and principle, and real love is worth more than any corner office, or luxury car or impressive title. That being underestimated just means you get to surprise people when you succeed on your own terms. He laughed softly. You're going to be terrifying when you're fully confident, you know that. I grinned. Good. The world could use more terrifying women who refuse to shrink themselves to fit other people's small imaginations. We stayed up late that night making plans, not for a big wedding, because neither of us wanted that, but for a small ceremony that reflected who we actually were. We'd get married at the original Ember and Oak location, the tiny space where Liam had started 8 years ago. We'd invite the people who'd supported us from the beginning, employees and farmers, and community partners, and the small circle of friends who'd never needed us to be anything other than ourselves. And yes, we'd invite my family too, because despite everything they were trying, and that deserved acknowledgement. The wedding happened on a May morning, when the Portland rain had finally given way to pale sunshine, and the smell of blooming roses drifted through open windows. The original Ember and Oak location was tiny, barely room for 40 people, but we filled it with everyone who mattered. Liam's employees decorated with flowers from the farmers' market and lights they'd strung by hand. The ceremony was simple, vows we'd written ourselves about partnership and purpose, and choosing each other every day. My students came and read poems they'd written about love and courage. Marcus, the kid who'd written about Atticus Finch, read one about quiet strength that made everyone cry. Mom and Dad sat in the front row holding hands, both of them beaming with what looked like genuine joy. Tyler stood as Liam's best man, a role that would have seemed impossible 3 years ago, but now felt exactly right. Jessica caught my bouquet, and immediately announced she and Tyler were going to start trying for a baby, that they wanted to raise kids with the values they'd finally learned to recognize. Grandmother Dorothy gave a toast about how wrong she'd been, and how grateful she was to have lived long enough to see real love up close. Aunt Patricia actually laughed at herself, admitting she'd been a snob, and that watching us had taught her to value character over credentials. Even Melissa had found her way to meaningful work, now managing social media for Ember and Oak, and using her marketing skills to tell stories about sustainable business and community impact. But the moment I'd remember forever came right after we were pronounced married, when Liam and I walked back down the aisle between rows of cheering friends and family. I caught my mother's eye, and she mouthed, "I'm so proud of you," with tears streaming down her face. Not proud in the conditional way she'd been before, not proud because I'd finally done something she understood, but proud because she'd learned to value what I'd chosen, to see the beauty in a life lived intentionally, even when it looked different from hers. The reception was held in the community garden behind the shop, long tables set up under string lights, food prepared by staff from all 7 Ember and Oak locations, each dish representing a different community they served. There was music and dancing and speeches that were funny and heartfelt. Liam and I moved through it all in a happy daze, grateful for every person there, for every hard conversation that had led to healing, for every moment of being underestimated that had taught us to value our own judgment over outside approval. As the evening wound down and guests started to leave, I found myself standing with Liam at the edge of the garden, watching the sun set over Portland's skyline. "We did it," I said softly. "We built something real despite everyone thinking we were building nothing at all." He pulled me close and I felt his heartbeat steady against my cheek. "We did. And the best part is, this is just the beginning. There's so much more to build, more programs to start, more students to reach, more ways to prove that quiet purpose beats loud prestige every single time." I thought about the girl I'd been at Tyler's wedding, sitting through that humiliating toast with a secret smile because I knew what was coming. I thought about all the years of judgment and dismissal, the comments about my modest salary and my boyfriend's humble job, the constant pressure to want more, be more, prove more. And I realized that every single moment of being underestimated had been a gift because it had forced me to become absolutely certain of my own worth, to build my confidence from internal truth rather than external validation. "Your brother's wedding was perfect," Mom had said. "When will it be your turn?" I'd smiled then, because I'd known something she didn't, that my turn wasn't about matching Tyler's expensive venue or designer dress, or impressive guest list. My turn was about finding someone who valued the same things I did, building a life that reflected our shared principles, creating impact that mattered more than appearance. And standing there in that community garden, married to a man who saw me completely, surrounded by family who'd finally learned to see us both, I realized my turn had been happening all along. I just hadn't needed anyone's permission to recognize it. The students whose lives would change because of the program I'd built, the employees Liam paid fairly and treated with dignity, the communities supported by his foundation, the family members who'd learned to value substance over surface, all of it was proof that the quiet path, the underestimated path, could lead somewhere more meaningful than any amount of conventional success. Mom approached us as the last guests were leaving, Dad beside her, both of them looking tired but content. "That was perfect," Mom said, and this time when she used that word it didn't carry the weight of comparison. It was perfect, because it was you, both of you. "Thank you for inviting us," Dad added. "Thank you for letting us be part of this after everything. We wouldn't have wanted you to miss it," Liam said graciously. "Family means showing up even when it's hard, even after mistakes. That's what makes it family." They hugged us both and left, and I watched them walk to their car with their arms around each other, two people who'd spent decades valuing the wrong things, and were now trying to learn a better way. It wouldn't be perfect. They'd probably slip back into old patterns sometimes, probably still struggle to fully understand choices they'd never make themselves, but they were trying, and that was enough. Liam and I stayed until everything was cleaned up, until the lights were taken down, and the tables folded and the garden was back to its usual quiet state. Then we drove to the small house we'd bought together in a modest neighborhood, nothing fancy but ours, filled with books and plants and space to build whatever came next. That night, lying in bed with my husband, yes, my husband, I thought about the whole journey, from that rainy Tuesday in a coffee shop to this moment, years of being judged and dismissed and pitied, all of it leading here. "What are you thinking about?" Liam asked, sleepily. "I'm thinking that everyone spent so long asking when it would be my turn, when I'd have what they thought I should want. But I had it all along. I had meaningful work and real love and a life built on purpose. I just had to wait for them to stop looking at the surface long enough to see it." He kissed my forehead. "Their blindness was never your problem. I know that now. And you know what's funny?" "What?" "The thing they pitied me for, choosing you, choosing teaching, choosing a simple life, those were the best decisions I ever made. Everything good in my life came from those choices they couldn't understand." We fell asleep wrapped around each other, and I dreamed about the future, about the students we'd reach, and the impact we'd have, and the family we'd raise with values that went deeper than appearances. I dreamed about growing old with someone who'd chosen me when I was already complete, Not because I needed saving, but because we wanted to build something together, and I dreamed about the moment years from now, when maybe my own kids would face pressure to follow conventional paths, and I'd tell them about their grandmother, who'd once pitied me for marrying a coffee shop worker, about how the most successful man I'd ever met wore an apron to work, about how the richest life isn't measured in dollars, but in meaning. The story would come full circle then, another generation learning that being underestimated is only painful if you need the estimation of people who can't see clearly. And my kids would understand what I'd learned through years of quiet endurance, that the people who truly matter will see your worth without you having to prove it, and everyone else's opinion is just noise you can choose not to hear. I woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the windows and Liam already up making coffee, the smell drifting through our small house like a promise of ordinary beautiful days ahead. I found him in the kitchen, still in his pajamas, and wrapped my arms around him from behind. "Good morning, husband," I said, testing out the word. He turned and kissed me properly. "Good morning, wife. How does it feel?" Like everything I didn't know I was waiting for, like home. We spent the morning reading the newspaper and making breakfast and talking about nothing important, and I realized this was what I'd been choosing all along. Not drama or prestige, or impressive stories to tell at parties, but quiet contentment with someone who valued the same things I did, who built his success without losing his humanity, who saw being underestimated as an opportunity rather than an insult. My phone buzzed with messages from family members still gushing about the wedding, about how beautiful it was, how meaningful, how perfectly it reflected who we were. Tyler sent a long text about how watching us had inspired him to propose a new community initiative at his nonprofit. Mom sent photos she'd taken of the garden and the ceremony with captions about how proud she was. Dad sent a simple message saying he'd made a donation to my literacy program in honor of our marriage. Even grandmother Dorothy, who barely knew how to text, sent a string of heart emojis, and the words, "You've taught this old woman more than she taught you, and that's exactly how it should be." I showed them all to Liam, and he smiled. "Look at that, you changed your whole family just by refusing to change yourself. Maybe that's the real lesson in all of this. That standing firm in who you are gives other people permission to question who they've been, that living according to your values, even when everyone thinks you're wrong, can eventually show them a better way." He nodded thoughtfully, and that being underestimated is only a problem if you underestimate yourself, which you never did, not once, not even when it would have been easier. I thought about that, about all the times I could have doubted my choices, could have looked at Tyler's success or my mother's disappointment, or the world's constant message that more money equals more value, and wondered if I'd gotten it wrong, but I never had. Even in my hardest moments, even when the judgment hurt, I'd known deep down that I was building something worth more than their approval, and now here I was, married to an extraordinary man, doing work that mattered, part of a family that was finally learning to see clearly. Not because I'd proven anything to them, but because I'd been patient enough to let the truth reveal itself in its own time. We finished our coffee and started planning the day. Nothing special, just a walk through the neighborhood and maybe dinner with friends. Normal life, the kind my family had once pitied me for, now revealed as exactly what I'd wanted all along. As we got ready to head out, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, the same woman who'd sat through Tyler's wedding with a knowing smile, who'd endured years of subtle criticism, who'd loved a man in an apron when everyone else saw only limitations. But different too, because now the secret was out, the truth was known, and the validation I'd never needed but had earned anyway was finally completely mine. "Your brother's wedding was perfect. When will it be your turn?" Mom had asked, and I'd smiled because I'd known my turn was already happening, just not in any way she could recognize. My turn was every morning I woke up next to someone who saw me completely, every student who discovered they could love reading, every choice I made based on meaning rather than money. Every moment of being underestimated that taught me to trust my own judgment over everyone else's limited vision. My turn wasn't a single event. It was a whole life, built quietly and deliberately, piece by piece, choice by choice, until it became something so solid that no amount of judgment could shake it. And when the truth finally came out, when my family saw what they'd been too blind to recognize, it didn't change anything essential, it just gave them the chance to finally see what had been there all along, what I'd known from that first rainy Tuesday in a coffee shop 3 years ago, that some people build empires loud, and some build them quiet, but the quiet ones are no less real. That being underestimated says more about the people doing the estimating than the person being judged. That love isn't about finding someone impressive, it's about finding someone true, and that a life of purpose, meaning, and authentic connection is worth more than any amount of conventional success, whether anyone else ever understands that or not. We walked out into the May sunshine, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next, carrying the knowledge that we'd already won the only game that mattered, not by proving ourselves to anyone, but by building a life so aligned with our values that outside validation became irrelevant. The story could have ended with the dramatic reveal at the gala, with shocked faces and public vindication, but the real ending was quieter than that, more lasting. It was this: walking through an ordinary neighborhood on an ordinary morning, completely at peace with choices that had once been criticized, building a future with someone who'd been dismissed, living proof that the people who underestimate you are really just revealing the limits of their own vision. And in the end, that was the greatest gift they could have given me, the certainty that came from being judged and choosing to trust myself anyway, the confidence built not from approval, but from alignment between my values and my life. My family would continue to grow and change. Some days they'd slip back into old patterns, other days they'd surprise me with how far they'd come, but either way, it no longer defined my worth, or determined my happiness. I'd found both of those things in places they'd never thought to look, and that made all the difference. The classroom was different now, 5 years after that May wedding in a tiny coffee shop, where there had once been 20 desks crammed into a too small space. There were now 40 in a renovated wing of the school, funded by a partnership between the Ember and Oak Foundation, and a coalition of Portland businesses that Liam had quietly assembled. The walls were lined with books, thousands of them, a library that had grown from a dream scribbled on grant applications to a reality that served not just my students but the entire community. I stood at the front of the room on a Tuesday afternoon in October, watching my students bent over their notebooks, working on personal essays about moments that changed them. The assignment was the same one I'd given 5 years ago, back when Marcus had written about Atticus Finch, and shown me why this work mattered. Marcus was in college now, studying education because he wanted to come back and teach kids like himself. He'd sent me a text that morning saying he'd been accepted into a graduate program with a full scholarship. I'd cried reading it, happy tears that Liam had wiped away over breakfast while our daughter babbled in her high chair, smearing oatmeal across her face with fierce determination. Our daughter, Lily Rose Bennett, 3 years old with Liam's dark curls, and my stubborn streak, named after the flowers he'd bought me the morning after Tyler's wedding when I'd needed a reminder that someone saw my worth. She spent her mornings at the preschool attached to one of Liam's coffee shops, a program he'd started to provide affordable childcare for employees and community members. She spent her afternoons with my mother, who had transformed from the woman who pitied my choices, to the grandmother who read to Lily for hours, and taught her that people could grow and change at any age. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd once questioned whether Liam could provide stability was now watching our child in the home she and Dad had downsized to, having realized they didn't need a big house in Lake Oswego to prove anything to anyone. They'd sold it and moved to a modest craftsman in northeast Portland, close to us, close to the life we'd built that they now wanted to be part of. My phone buzzed with a text from Liam. Running 15 minutes late for pickup, got pulled into a meeting with the mayor about the new youth employment initiative. Your mom said she's happy to keep Lily until I get there. I smiled and texted back, no rush, we're good here. Tell the mayor I said the city better fund that initiative properly or they'll answer to me. He sent back a laughing emoji and a heart. Even after 5 years of marriage, 7 years together, the small exchanges still made me feel seen in a way I'd never take for granted. The bell rang and my students packed up their things, a chaos of backpacks and chatter and reminders about homework. A girl named Sophia lingered after the others left, hovering by my desk with the uncertainty of someone working up courage. Miss Bennet, she started then stopped, fidgeting with her notebook. Can I ask you something? Of course, I said, giving her my full attention. She took a breath. How did you know teaching was the right choice? Like, everyone keeps telling me I should do something that makes more money, that I'm too smart to just be a teacher, but this is what I want. I just don't know how to make people understand. I felt my heart squeeze because I'd been her, standing in that exact place of knowing what mattered to me, while everyone else insisted I was aiming too low. I came around the desk and sat on the edge, meeting her eyes. Sophia, the people telling you that teaching isn't enough are measuring worth by the wrong standards. They're looking at salary instead of impact, at status instead of meaning. And here's what I've learned. The only person who needs to understand your choice is you. Everyone else will either come around or they won't, but that's their journey, not yours. She nodded slowly, absorbing this. But what if they're right? What if I'm making a mistake? Then it will be your mistake to make, and your lesson to learn, I said gently. But I don't think you are. I think you're seeing something they can't, that changing one kid's life matters more than any corner office or impressive title, and the beautiful thing about that truth is it doesn't need anyone else's validation to be real. Her eyes filled with tears. My parents think I'm wasting my potential. They want me to be a doctor or lawyer or something that sounds important. I reached out and squeezed her hand. My family thought the same thing. My mother stood at my brother's wedding and asked when I'd find someone who could provide stability, right in front of the man I was dating, who she assumed was just a coffee shop worker. She had no idea he'd built a multi-million-dollar company. She couldn't see his worth because she was too busy measuring him by his job title. Sophia's eyes went wide. Wait, Mr. Bennet, your husband, he's the Ember and Oak guy. I'd heard rumors, but I thought. I nodded. He is. And for 3 years my entire family dismissed him, pitied me for dating him, worried about my future. Not because he wasn't successful, but because his success looked different than what they expected. They literally couldn't see it even when it was right in front of them. So what happened? They learned. Eventually, after a pretty spectacular moment where the truth came out and they had to face how wrong they'd been. But here's the thing, Sophia, I didn't wait for their approval to build my life. I chose teaching anyway. I loved Liam anyway. I built the life that felt right to me anyway. And when they finally came around, it was nice, but it wasn't necessary. I was already happy. She wiped at her eyes. So I should just do it. Just choose teaching even if they don't approve. I should just do what feels true to you. And if teaching is that, if you feel it in your bones that this is your path, then trust that. The people who love you will either learn to see the value in your choice, or they'll reveal that they love their idea of who you should be more than who you actually are. Either way, you'll know the truth, and you'll have a life you built on purpose instead of on other people's expectations. She hugged me then, fierce and quick, and whispered thank you before hurrying out to catch her bus. I watched her go and saw myself at 17, at 22, at 28, all the versions of me that had chosen meaning over money and waited for the world to catch up. Some people never did catch up. Some still didn't understand why I taught for a modest salary when I was married to someone wealthy. But their confusion didn't diminish my satisfaction, didn't make the work less important, didn't change the fact that I woke up every morning knowing exactly why I did what I did. I packed up my own things and headed out to my car, the same old Camry I'd been driving for years because it still ran fine and buying something new felt wasteful. Liam had offered multiple times to get me a new car, something safer, more reliable, but I'd refused. This one still works, I'd told him. When it doesn't, then we'll talk. He'd laughed and kissed my forehead and never pushed, because he understood that for me it wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. Why replace something that still served its purpose just to have something shinier? That wasn't who I was, and 5 years of marriage hadn't changed that core part of me. If anything, being with Liam had reinforced it. He still worked the counter at the Pearl District location twice a week, still roasted beans at 4 in the morning, still knew every employee's name and their kids' names and asked about their lives with genuine interest. Success hadn't changed him because his success was built on staying connected to the purpose, not ascending above it. I drove through Portland's autumn streets, the trees turning gold and crimson, and thought about how different this drive felt from 5 years ago when I'd been heading to Tyler's wedding, bracing myself for judgment and commentary. Now I was heading to my parents' house to pick up my daughter, and the dread had been replaced by something close to peace, not perfect peace, because families were complicated and old patterns sometimes resurfaced, but peace built on years of honest conversation and genuine effort to change. Mom and Dad's house was warm with light when I pulled up, and through the window I could see Mom on the floor with Lily, both of them surrounded by picture books. The sight still sometimes caught me off guard. This woman who'd once valued appearance over everything now sitting cross-legged in comfortable clothes, completely absorbed in making animal sounds to entertain her granddaughter. I let myself in and heard Lily's squeal of delight. "Mama," she barreled toward me and I scooped her up, breathing in the scent of her, apple juice and crayons, and the baby shampoo we still used even though she insisted she was a big girl now. Mom stood more slowly, her knees not what they used to be, and smiled at us both. "She was wonderful today," she said. "We read 10 books, drew pictures of every animal we could think of, and had a very serious tea party with her stuffed bears." "Thank you for watching her," I said, and meant it. Mom crossed to kiss my cheek. "It's my joy, Emma, truly, these afternoons with her are," she paused, searching for words. "They're teaching me what I missed with you and Tyler. How to just be present without worrying about what it looks like, what it means for the future, all of that. She's teaching me to see what matters." I felt my throat tighten. "You're a wonderful grandmother. She deserves you, and I deserved a better mother back then." Mom said quietly. "I'm trying to make up for it now, even though I know that's not really possible." "You can't change the past, but you can shape the present," I said. "That's what you're doing." "That's enough." Lily wiggled to get down and ran to gather her drawings, a stack of papers covered in enthusiastic scribbles that Mom had labeled with careful printing. "This is an elephant," Lily announced, holding up something that looked more like a purple cloud with legs. "It's beautiful," I said seriously. "We'll hang it on the fridge with all the others." Dad emerged from the kitchen with a plate of cookies, his hair grayer than it had been 5 years ago, but his smile more genuine. "There's my favorite granddaughter," he said, and Lily giggled because she was his only granddaughter, a joke between them that never got old. He handed her a cookie and turned to me. "Tyler called earlier. He and Jessica are pregnant again." I felt a surge of happiness. "That's wonderful." "When?" "Early summer," he said. "They wanted us to know before they announced it widely." "And Emma," he hesitated. "Tyler specifically said he wanted to talk to you about parenting advice, said you and Liam were doing it right, and he wanted to learn from you." The statement hung in the air, heavy with meaning. 5 years ago, Tyler had been the golden child, the one doing everything right, the standard against which I was measured and found wanting. Now he was asking me for guidance, recognizing that the life I'd built had value he wanted to understand. It was a complete reversal, and I could see in Dad's eyes that he recognized it too, that he was proud of it in a way he'd never been proud before. "Tell him I'd be happy to talk," I said. "Anytime." I meant it too. Whatever complicated history we had, Tyler had genuinely tried to change, to value different things, to build a life of meaning instead of just achievement. He'd become a real brother to me in the past 5 years, someone I actually wanted to spend time with, whose friendship with Liam had deepened into something authentic. We gathered Lily's things, the stuffed animals and extra clothes, and half-finished art projects that seemed to multiply every time she spent an afternoon with her grandparents. Mom walked us to the door and hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I know I say it a lot now, maybe too much, but I need you to hear it. Proud of the teacher you are, the mother you are, the woman you've always been, even when I was too foolish to see it." I hugged her back, this woman who'd caused me so much pain, and who was working so hard to heal it. "I know, Mom, I know." Driving home with Lily singing nonsense songs in her car seat, I thought about the long strange journey from that coffee shop meeting to this moment. The years of being underestimated, the wedding toast that could have broken something fragile, the gala reveal that changed everything, and then the quieter years after, building a life and a family and watching people learn to see differently. My phone rang through the car's Bluetooth, and Liam's voice filled the space. "Hey, I'm about 10 minutes from home, should I pick up dinner?" "Already handled," I said. "Your mom dropped off enough lasagna to feed an army." She said something about making sure her grandbaby has proper nutrition and her son remembers to eat vegetables. He laughed. "My mother has decided you're the best thing that ever happened to me, and she's making up for the fact that your mother used to think the opposite." The irony of our mother's reversal still amused us both. Liam's mother, who'd always supported us quietly, had become more vocal about it as my family's transformation unfolded. She'd told me once, with characteristic bluntness, that watching my family learn to value you properly was satisfying in a way I can't quite explain, like justice, but kinder. We pulled into our driveway at the same time, Liam's car beside mine, and Lily shrieked with excitement at seeing her daddy. He got her out of her seat, while I gathered the mountain of things we seemed to accumulate everywhere she went, and together we walked into our home. It was still modest by the standards of what we could afford, a 3-bedroom craftsman with a garden out back, where we grew vegetables and herbs. We could have bought something much larger, much flashier, but this felt right. Rooms filled with books and art, and Lily's toys, a kitchen where we cooked together, a backyard where we had friends over for simple dinners, a life built on what mattered rather than what impressed. While Liam got Lily ready for dinner, I checked my email and found a message from the school district. They wanted to expand the literacy program to 3 more schools, had secured funding from multiple sources, including a significant grant from, I smiled reading it, the Bennett Family Foundation. Liam had created it 2 years ago, a separate entity from the Ember and Oak Foundation, focused specifically on education initiatives. He'd done it without telling me, just presented me with the paperwork one morning, and said, "Now you have dedicated resources for every crazy ambitious idea you've ever had about changing kids' lives." I'd cried then, and I felt tears prick my eyes now, reading about how that foundation was opening doors for hundreds more students. Liam appeared in the doorway, Lily on his hip. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," I said, blinking rapidly. "The program is expanding to 3 more schools." "The Bennett Foundation came through with funding," he grinned. "That's fantastic. See what happens when you stop limiting yourself to what seems realistic and just go for what's needed." "It's not me going for it," I said. "It's you making it possible." He crossed the room and kissed me, Lily giggling between us. "It's both of us. You have the vision, I just help resource it. That's what partnership looks like." We ate dinner as a family, Lily telling elaborate stories about her day with Grammy that bore little resemblance to reality but delighted us anyway. After, while Liam did bath time, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea and watched the sun set over our neighborhood. This was it, I thought. This was the life my family had pitied me for choosing. Modest house, teacher's salary, simple pleasures, and it was everything. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Heard you talked to your dad. Tyler really does want parenting advice. You guys make it look easy, and we're honestly struggling. Any chance we could come over this weekend?" I texted back, "Come for brunch Saturday." Fair warning, it's not easy, we just try to stay present and remember what matters. "Looking forward to hearing about baby number 2. She sent back a string of grateful emojis, and I smiled, remembering the woman who'd looked at me with barely concealed pity at her own wedding, who'd agreed with my mother's concerns about my future. Now she was asking for my guidance, recognizing that the life she'd once dismissed had something she wanted. Another reversal, another piece of evidence that being underestimated just meant people were looking at the wrong things. Saturday came with rare Portland sunshine, and Tyler and Jessica arrived with their daughter Mia, who was 4, and immediately dragged Lily off to play. We settled on the back patio, with coffee and pastries from the Pearl District Ember and Oak, still my favorite location because it's where everything started. Tyler looked tired but content in a way he never had during his corporate finance days. How do you do it? He asked without preamble. Balance the work you love with being present for Lily, because I feel like I'm failing at both constantly. Liam and I exchanged a glance. We don't balance it, Liam said, we integrate it. My work matters, Emma's work matters, Lily matters, and we try not to separate them into competing priorities. She comes to the coffee shop sometimes, Emma brings students to tour our facilities. We make the work part of our life, instead of something we have to balance against living. Jessica leaned forward, but don't you ever feel like you're shortchanging her, like she deserves more of your time? Every parent feels that, I said gently, but I think the question isn't how much time, it's what quality of presence. I'd rather have 2 focused hours with Lily where I'm really there, than 6 hours where I'm distracted by work or guilt, or trying to be someone I'm not. Tyler nodded slowly. That makes sense, and it's easier when the work means something, right? When it's not just about a paycheck or status, but about actual impact. Exactly, Liam said, when you believe in what you're doing, when it aligns with your values, being present for it, and being present for family, aren't opposing forces, they feed each other. We talked for hours, sharing the messy reality of parenting and work and trying to build something meaningful in a world that constantly pushed for more, bigger, flashier. Jessica admitted she'd been struggling with the pressure to return to her high-powered marketing job, that she'd discovered she wanted to do something that mattered more than something that paid well. I think I've been chasing the wrong things, she said quietly. Watching you guys, seeing how content you are with less, it's made me question everything. You don't have less, Tyler said looking at me. That's what I finally figured out, you have more of what actually counts. Less stuff maybe, less status, but more meaning, more presence, more alignment between who you are and how you live. That's not less. That's everything. Hearing him say it, this man who'd once pitied me for my choices, who'd told Liam that everyone has to start somewhere, as if Liam was at the beginning of a journey he'd already completed, it felt like a full circle moment. Not triumphant exactly, but satisfying in a quiet way. They left in the late afternoon, both of them thanking us repeatedly, and Liam and I cleaned up while Lily napped on the couch, exhausted from playing. Do you ever wish you'd told them sooner? He asked, as we loaded the dishwasher, about the company, about everything. Would it have saved you from the judgment? I thought about it, maybe, but then I wouldn't have learned what I learned, that I didn't need their approval, that my worth wasn't dependent on their understanding, that I could build a life so solid that outside opinion became irrelevant. Those lessons were worth the temporary pain of being underestimated. He pulled me into his arms. You're remarkable, you know that. I'm just someone who refused to shrink myself to fit other people's small imaginations, I said. Lots of people do that, they just don't all get the dramatic reveal at a fancy gala. He laughed. True. Though that was pretty spectacular, I grinned against his chest. It really was. Seeing your grandfather put Aunt Patricia in her place might be one of my favorite memories. We stood there swaying slightly, and I thought about all the moments that had led here, the rain, the coffee shop, the years of patience, the wedding toast, the gala, the apologies, the rebuilding. And now this. An ordinary Saturday afternoon, cleaning up after brunch with family who'd learned to see us clearly. This was the victory, not the moment they realized they'd been wrong, but the life we'd built that was so fulfilling their realization didn't really change anything essential. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Liam and I sat in the living room with books and comfortable silence, but my mind kept drifting to Sophia, to the conversation we'd had about choosing teaching despite pressure to do something that seemed more impressive. I thought about all the students over the years who'd faced similar pressure, who'd been told their dreams weren't big enough, or practical enough, or impressive enough. How many of them had listened to those voices instead of their own? How many had chosen security over purpose, because they didn't have examples showing them another way was possible? I'm thinking about starting something new, I said to Liam. He looked up from his book. Tell me. A mentorship program, I said, ideas forming as I spoke. For students who want to pursue work that matters more than work that pays, teaching, social work, nonprofit, arts, anything where the impact is bigger than the salary. They'd get paired with adults who chose those paths and are thriving, who can show them it's possible to build a meaningful life without chasing conventional success. Liam's eyes lit up. That's brilliant. You'd be showing them what your family couldn't see, that success comes in forms that aren't always recognized, but are just as valid. Exactly, and maybe, if enough people see it, if enough kids grow up knowing they have permission to chase meaning instead of money, we start to shift the whole conversation about what makes a life successful. He set down his book and moved to sit beside me. The foundation will fund it, whatever you need. Space, resources, staff, all of it. This is exactly what we should be doing. I leaned against him, grateful for this man who saw my dreams, and immediately asked how he could help make them real, who never questioned whether my work mattered enough to deserve resources, who treated my teacher's passion projects with the same seriousness he treated million-dollar business decisions. We'll call it. I paused, thinking. What about the other path project, showing kids there isn't one right way, just the way that's right for them? Perfect, he said, let's build it. And so we did. Over the next year, the Other Path project grew from an idea to a reality. We recruited mentors from across Portland, people who'd chosen purpose over prestige, and built remarkable lives, teachers and social workers, and artists and nonprofit leaders, people whose bank accounts might not be impressive but whose impact was undeniable. We matched them with high school students facing pressure to choose practical over passionate, and we watched those relationships transform how kids saw their futures. Sophia was one of our first mentees. We paired her with a veteran teacher who'd left a law career to work with immigrant students and never once regretted the pay cut. 6 months later, Sophia was applying to education programs with confidence, armed with examples of people who'd made the choice she wanted to make and were thriving. Her parents still didn't fully understand, but she'd found her certainty, and that was enough. The program expanded quickly because the need was everywhere. Kids who wanted to be musicians but felt pressure to study business. Kids who wanted to do social justice work, but heard constantly that they'd never make enough money. Kids who had purpose figured out but couldn't find examples of people living it successfully. We gave them those examples, showed them that being underestimated for following your heart was temporary, but living someone else's life was permanent, and they began to choose differently. 2 years into the program, we held our first annual celebration, bringing together mentors and mentees to share stories and honor the courage it took to choose the road less validated. The event was held at the Columbia River Gorge Estate, the same place where my family had learned the truth about Liam. Full circle again, but this time, instead of shocking revelations, it was pure celebration of people choosing authentically. My entire family came to support it. Mom and Dad sponsored a table. Tyler brought students from his nonprofit to see what was possible. Jessica had left marketing entirely and was training to be a therapist, finally pursuing work that filled her instead of just paying her. Aunt Patricia, in perhaps the biggest transformation of all, had become one of our mentors, working with young women who felt pressure to marry well instead of build independently. Even grandmother Dorothy was there, 90 years old and sharp as ever, holding court and telling anyone who'd listen about her granddaughter who'd known all along what mattered. I stood at the front of the room to give opening remarks, Lily sitting with Liam in the second row, now 5 years old and full of questions about everything. I looked out at the faces gathered, students who were brave enough to choose meaning, mentors who were living proof it was possible, family who'd learned to recognize success in forms they'd once dismissed. Thank you for being here, I began. This program exists because I spent years being told I was aiming too low, because I chose teaching when I could have made more money elsewhere, because I fell in love with a man people dismissed for working behind a counter, because every choice I made, that felt true to me, looked like settling to people who measured worth differently. I paused, gathering my thoughts, but here's what I learned. Being underestimated is only painful if you need the estimation of people who can't see clearly. And the people who matter, the ones who see you, they don't need you to prove anything, because they recognize your worth without evidence. Everyone else's opinion is just noise, and you can choose not to hear it. There was applause, but I held up a hand because I wasn't finished. The students in this room are choosing paths that might not impress at dinner parties. They're choosing impact over income, meaning over money, purpose over prestige, and the world will judge them for it. People will ask when they'll get a real job, when they'll start thinking practically, when they'll grow up and chase what everyone else is chasing. But you, I look directly at the students now, you'll know something they don't, that a life aligned with your values is worth more than any amount of external validation, that doing work that matters to you is its own reward, whether anyone else understands it or not. That being true to yourself isn't settling, it's succeeding in the way that counts most. The applause that followed was thunderous, students and mentors on their feet, and I saw tears on faces throughout the room. Sophia was crying openly, mouthing thank you from her seat. Her parents were there too, and while they still looked uncertain, they were there, trying to understand, and that was something. After the formal program ended, and the room dissolved into conversation and connection, Mom found me near the windows overlooking the gorge. That was beautiful, she said, and hard to hear, if I'm honest, because I was exactly the kind of person you were talking about, the one who judges choices I don't understand, who measures worth by all the wrong standards. I know, I said gently, but you changed. You're here, supporting this, helping fund a program that tells kids to ignore pressure like the pressure you used to put on me. That's growth, Mom. That counts. She took my hand. I was so wrong about so much, about Liam, about teaching, about what makes a life successful. And the worst part is, I thought I was helping you. I thought my judgment was protection, but it was just fear dressed up as concern, fear that you'd struggle, that you'd have less than I wanted for you. You wanted me to be safe, I said. That's not entirely wrong, but you define safety as money and status when real safety is knowing who you are and building a life that reflects it. That's what I found. That's what you couldn't see until you were ready. She nodded, tears streaming now. I'm so grateful you didn't listen to me. That you trusted yourself enough to ignore my foolishness. Me too, I said, because if I'd listened, if I'd let your fear shape my choices, I'd have missed everything that matters. This work, Liam, Lily, all of it came from refusing to live your version of my life. We stood together watching the sun set over the gorge, and I thought about how far we'd both come, her from the woman who'd pitied me publicly, to the woman who funded programs celebrating the exact choices she'd once criticized. Me from the daughter desperate for approval to the woman who'd learned that self-approval was the only kind that lasted. Liam appeared with Lily, who was getting sleepy and clingy. Time to head home, he asked. I nodded, and we said our goodbyes, accepting congratulations and thanks from students and mentors, from family members who'd watched our journey and learned from it. On the drive home, Lily fell asleep in minutes, and Liam and I drove in comfortable quiet. Do you ever miss it? He asked after a while. Miss what? The moment they realized, the gala, the look on their faces when they understood they'd been wrong. Do you ever wish you could go back and experience that again? I thought about it honestly. No, I said finally. That moment was satisfying, sure, but this, building programs that help other people choose authentically, watching students find courage, seeing my family genuinely transformed, this is better. This is the moment that keeps happening instead of one dramatic reveal. This is the proof that choosing right matters more than being proven right. He reached over and took my hand. I love you. I love that you could have held their judgment against them forever, but chose to let them grow. I love that you took the pain of being underestimated and turned it into something that helps others who are facing the same pressure. I love who you are, Emma, always have. I squeezed his hand. This man who'd been dismissed for wearing an apron, who'd built an empire while staying humble enough to mop floors, who'd loved me when I had nothing to prove him right, except my own certainty that he was worth loving. We got home, and I carried Lily to bed, while Liam locked up. I stood in her doorway for a moment, watching her sleep, and thought about the world she was growing up in. She'd face pressure, no doubt. Pressure to be impressive, to chase money, to prove her worth through external measures. But she'd also have examples of a different way, her parents who'd chosen meaning over status. Her grandparents who'd learned to value substance, her uncle who'd left a lucrative career for work that mattered, her extended family of mentors and students all choosing authentically. She'd know, in a way I hadn't known growing up, that success came in as many forms as there were people to define it. That being underestimated just meant the estimators had limited vision, that the only approval that mattered was her own, paired with a life that reflected her values. I hoped that knowledge would make her brave. I hoped it would make her kind to others facing similar choices. I hoped it would make her the kind of person who saw worth in places others missed, who valued substance over surface, who built a life of meaning regardless of whether it looked impressive to strangers. Liam wrapped his arms around me from behind, both of us watching our daughter sleep. "She's going to be remarkable," he whispered. "She already is," I said, "but more than that, she's going to know she's enough exactly as she is. That's the gift we can give her that our parents couldn't give us. The certainty that her worth isn't up for debate." We went to bed that night, wrapped around each other, and I dreamed about the future, about Lily growing up, confident in her choices. About Sophia, and hundreds of students like her pursuing work that mattered, about my family continuing to grow and change. About Liam and me aging together, building more programs, helping more people, staying true to the values that had guided us from that rainy Tuesday to this moment. And I dreamed about the day, maybe 20 years from now, when someone would tell Lily she was aiming too low, that she should want more, that her choices weren't impressive enough. And I dreamed about her smiling the way I'd smiled at Tyler's wedding, that knowing smile of someone who'd already learned the secret that being underestimated just reveals the limits of other people's vision, not the limits of your potential. She'd build her life anyway, she'd choose her path anyway, she'd find her people anyway, and she'd thrive anyway, because she'd know what I'd learned through years of quiet persistence, that the people who matter see your worth without proof, and everyone else's opinion is just noise you can choose not to hear. The story that had started with public humiliation at a wedding, with years of judgment and dismissal, with a dramatic reveal that changed everything, it didn't end with validation or revenge or even transformation. It ended with this: an ordinary life built on extraordinary principles, a family healed through patience and honesty, a legacy of choosing authentically that would ripple out through students and mentees, and eventually through my own daughter. It ended with the understanding that being proven right matters less than living right, that external validation is nice, but internal alignment is essential, that the victory isn't in changing minds, but in building a life so solid that other people's minds become irrelevant. Mom had asked when it would be my turn, looking at Tyler's perfect wedding, and seeing my life as lacking. But my turn had been happening all along, in every choice that honored who I was, in every student whose life changed, in every moment with Liam that felt like coming home, in every value I refused to compromise despite pressure. My turn wasn't a single event, it was a whole life, still unfolding, still growing, still teaching me that the quiet path, and the authentic path, and the underestimated path could lead somewhere more beautiful than any amount of conventional success. And now, 5 years after that gala reveal, 7 years after that rainy coffee shop meeting, 10 years after I'd chosen teaching over corporate careers, I could finally say with complete certainty that I'd won, not because I'd proven anyone wrong, though I had. Not because my family had learned to value what I'd built, though they had, but because I'd built a life so aligned with my values that their approval, while nice, had never been necessary. That was the real victory. That was my turn, and it had been worth every moment of being underestimated to arrive here, standing in my daughter's doorway, married to a man who saw me completely, doing work that mattered, part of a family that had learned to see clearly, knowing with absolute certainty that I'd chosen right all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.